You have $25 million and nobody knows. Not your roommate from 3 years ago who still texts about splitting old utility bills. Not your coworkers who think you're doing fine. Maybe a little better than fine. Not the barista who started remembering your order without asking. You're not hiding. You're just ordinary on purpose. The number didn't arrive with any ceremony. It showed up in a spreadsheet your accountant emailed on a Wednesday afternoon while you were standing in the paint aisle of a hardware store, trying to decide between 2 shades of off-white for a rental property nobody's ever bothered to look up. This is what $25 million actually looks like when it happens to a regular person. Not a founder, not a headline, just someone who paid attention when everyone else was scrolling.
It starts with a laundromat. You're 24. You make $52,000 a year in logistics, tracking shipments on a screen for 9 hours a day. You have $1,800 in checking and a roommate situation held together by a group chat. You're doing laundry on a Sunday, the way you always do. When you notice a guy who comes in weekly, doesn't do laundry, just refills the change machine with a key and leaves within 15 minutes. You ask him what he's doing. He says he owns the place, nets around $4,200 a month, owns 2 more like it. He says this like it's a hobby, not a fortune, then gets in his truck and leaves. You go home and can't stop thinking about it. Not the laundromat. The fact that this man you'd have walked past without a second glance built something that pays him whether he's there or not. You open your laptop and start searching. A small laundromat can net $35,000 a year, purchased for $140,000, a 25% return. You've never heard of an investment that does that. You don't have $140,000. You have $1,800. Most people stop here. You almost do too, but the next morning you start a separate savings account, $200 a paycheck. And you start visiting laundromats on your day off, writing down what you notice, which ones are neglected, which ones have handwritten out-of-order signs yellowing on the wall. It takes 14 months to save $9,600. During that time, you take a part-time weekend job at a different laundromat, run by a tired man named Pete, who's been trying to sell for a year with no offers because his listing photos look like they're from 2009. You ask to see his numbers. 18 machines, $96,000 gross, but he's overpaying a decade-old maintenance contract and still paying for a fax line nobody uses. His net is stuck at $22,000, when the location could do far better. You ask if he'd consider seller financing. He says nobody's ever asked him that. You hand him a 1-page plan. 3 weeks later, he calls back in 4 days and says yes. You put down $9,600. He finances the rest, $58,000, paid out of the laundromat's own cash flow. You're 25 and you own a laundromat. You didn't have $67,000. You had $9,600, a part-time job that taught you the business from the inside, and a question almost nobody else thought to ask. You don't tell people at work. Your roommate knows vaguely you bought into some laundromat thing, and you let them think that's all it is. Year 1. After fixing the maintenance contract and cutting the dead phone line, it nets $31,000. Your coworker gets a $4,000 bonus and buys a TV he talks about for 2 weeks. You say congratulations, and don't mention your laundromat made 8 times that while you slept. By 26, you buy a second one. Same pattern. Bloated expenses, tired owner, a question nobody asks. This time, a local bank finances it because you can show real numbers. By 27, you own 3, netting just under $96,000 a year combined. You're still working logistics, telling yourself you'll quit once the cushion is real. You don't buy a new car. You're still driving the same 2014 Civic with a check engine light that's been on so long you stopped noticing. When your roommate moves out to get married, you find a new one and keep splitting the same rent instead of upgrading. At 28, you quit logistics quietly. 3 weeks notice, no announcement. Nobody there ever learns what you were building. This is also the year you start noticing parking lots the way you once started noticing laundromats. A half-empty lot next to one of your locations, municipal auctions nobody attends. You buy a small lot for $34,000. It starts generating $1,400 a month from 2 businesses leasing spots. Same architecture. Something boring that solves a small problem and pays you either way. By 30, you own 5 laundromats, 2 parking lots, and a brokerage account you barely check.
Net worth crosses $1.1 million. This is the first time the math stops feeling like a hobby. You still don't tell anyone. At a backyard barbecue, a guy in his 30s with a financed Audi talks about his real estate portfolio, which turns out to be one underwater property. He asks what you do. A few laundromats and some parking lots, you say. He nods, unimpressed, and turns to someone else within 30 seconds. You don't feel insulted. You feel relief. The moment someone decides you're not interesting is the moment they stop watching.
At 32, you buy your first apartment building. 8 units, from a widow in her 70s who'd let rents fall years below market because she didn't have the heart to raise them. You buy it for $410,000, gradually bring rents to market over 18 months, fix a leaking roof and bad wiring. Within 2 years, it nets $94,000, nearly triple, while the building is genuinely better maintained than before. You keep repeating the pattern for years. Not a secret formula, just the same gap, again and again. Small businesses and properties built by people who never optimize them, waiting for someone patient enough to notice. By 35, you own 8 laundromats, 4 parking lots, 3 apartment buildings totaling 41 units, and a brokerage account quietly compounding in the background. You drive a paid-off Honda CR-V. You live in a modest 3-bedroom house with a basketball hoop down the street. Your neighbors think you work in property management. Technically true.
Your accountant, Priscilla, sends quarterly summaries in the same plain format every time. One Wednesday afternoon, standing in a hardware store paint aisle, you open one almost out of habit. Subject line, Q2 summary, final. Your combined net worth has crossed $25 million. You read it twice. Fluorescent light overhead, someone 2 aisles over asking about caulk. Nobody knows. You think briefly about the version of you standing in a laundromat 11 years earlier, $1,800 in your account, watching a stranger refill a change machine. You feel almost the exact same thing now that you felt then. Not pride, something quieter. Recognition. You text Priscilla back 3 words. Thanks, looks right. Then you buy the paint you were already leaning toward, $34, and drive home in the CR-V.
Here's what almost nobody understands about reaching a number like this quietly. The money stopped being the interesting part a long time ago. What's interesting is how invisible the whole process was the entire time. Your parents think you're doing fine. Your old roommate has no idea. The guy with the Audi would still assume you're somewhere below him on whatever scale he uses to measure people. You haven't lied to anyone. You've just never corrected what people assumed. Because the moment people know what you have, the relationship changes shape whether anyone intends it to or not. So you've kept the space clean. The Honda, the modest house, the same close friends who knew you back when $1,800 felt like real money.
A few months later, your 24-year-old cousin calls, stressed. $3,000 in credit card debt, an idea for a weekend pressure washing business with no real plan to fund it. You could send the money before the call ends and never feel it. You don't. Instead, you ask to come by Saturday. You sit at his kitchen table for 3 hours, the way you once sat across from Pete. You find a used pressure washer for 1/3 of the price of new. You help him write a 1-page pitch for local landlords. He starts the business 3 weeks later with $740 instead of $3,000. He calls the night he lands his 5th client, sounding the way people sound when something they built with their own hands actually starts working. You don't tell him about the $25 million. Maybe you never will. Not because you don't trust him, but because you understand now that the number was never really the point. The architecture was the point. Noticing the gap nobody else was looking at, and being willing to sit with a small, unglamorous answer long enough to let it compound into something real. You drive home with the windows down, past a laundromat that isn't yours, an ordinary street in an ordinary town. Tomorrow, there's a maintenance call about a dryer. Priscilla will send a note about Q3. Your cousin's business will book its 6th client by Monday. nothing about your week looks any different than it did before the email arrived. What's different is quieter than that. It's knowing that the performance of wealth and the architecture of it rarely live in the same person at the same time. The knowing doesn't make Monday easier, but it does make you wonder, quietly, what you're actually building now that the number everyone chases has already arrived.